Good evening, I'm Anne-Marie Ganes and welcome to Pillars of Progress, a look at the work our government is doing as it implements the development plans for the nation. First up, Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar returns from her mission to Brazil, bringing commitment of increased business. In meeting with reporters at the airport, she described the visit as being extremely successful.
First of all, I want to state that the visit to Brazil was a very timely one. We do not live as independent nations totally. You know the expression, no man is an island. And in the same way, no nation can stand alone now in the global village. What we are seeing is the interdependence of world communities being a reality. And we live in this global village. To progress, we cannot just stay in our village and hope for something to happen. Wait for somebody to come to you at your door. It doesn't work that way anymore. And the world is very competitive. Each nation seeks to gain advantage in areas where they have what is called a competitive edge. And for Trinidad and Tobago, we have several areas in which we have competitive advantages. We are ideally located here. So geographically, we are ideally located for the West to go back into the old world. Our climate is one that is most comfortable for all. Our people are exceedingly educated and talented. Our human resource is tremendous. And whilst we are here, and sometimes we moan about the inefficiencies in the way we conduct and do business, when you go elsewhere, you will see that they are even more disadvantaged in terms of efficiencies and doing businesses. And so we have that advantage as well. As an English-speaking country, that is an advantage too. And as I come back to the human resources of this country, we have been in Brazil. They're growing, they're tremendously growing. It's just massive, masses, thousands and millions. I think there are almost nearly 200 million people in Brazil. Their land mass, multiply ours to the X factor. Their land mass is tremendous, the natural resource is tremendous. But they need partnering with others to develop those resources that they have. And we are ideally placed in every regard to offer that kind of partnership. And it is not that we are all altruistic, that we go there to say, well, we are great people and we want to help you. It doesn't work that way. It works as a win-win for both nations. It should be and must be a win-win for both nations. And so the expertise that we have in certain areas can be transferred to Brazil, who, as I say, have enormous resources, but may lack in the arena of capacity in certain areas. And Trinidad and Tobago, our expertise in oil and gas, we have a 100-year-old expertise in oil and then thereafter in gas. The finds in Brazil now amount to, billions and billions of natural resource in the energy sector. They need to lift that out of the ground. And I asked the question, why is it only now that they realize they have all this oil and gas? And they said technology before was not that good to find it under salt. But now technology has advanced, so they've been able to make all these discoveries. And they need to lift that out of the ground. How can they do it? Yes, they have Petrobras, which is what, I think is the 7th largest company in the world, 5th largest company in the world. But we have tremendous expertise because of this 100 years of knowledge in the field, and so we can partner with them. And the way I see it, when I said the world now is a global village, we have to market Trinidad and Tobago. We can have the best climate, the most educated people, the natural resources in abundance. However, we have to attract investments and investors home here. We can't do this by sitting at home in Trinidad and Tobago. You will say the businessmen can go on their own without the government team. But when a government team goes, the doors open faster. There's no question about it. The doors open faster. They're more willing to accommodate because they see that the government is also committed to whatever projects may come out of those visits.
The Prime Minister also spoke of her commitment towards developing this country's tourism sector. To this end, air links are to be developed between Brazil and Trinidad and Tobago, with special emphasis on Tobago tourism.
I'm concerned because about this, despite pouring heavy resources into market in Tobago, for example, Tobago continues to languish. But here is Barbados. With due respect to Barbados, what do they have to offer? What is their product? Tourism. What does Trinidad have to offer? Services, energy, manufacturing, and tourism in Tobago. So we need to really look at that more carefully and see how we can maximize on our advantages here. Whilst I was, as you say, all these meetings took place on the margins of the World Economic Forum, and that helps you really to take a dispassionate look at how we are doing in Trinidad and Tobago, how well we are doing it, and how we can go forward to do even better. I believe that our approach in forming targeted partnerships across the globe is the correct one. More than ever, now is the time. Because if we don't do it, there'll be other nations will get out there and they will grab. The early bird gets the worm or the apple, or both. We need to go out there and grab it.
Trade and Industry Minister Stephen Cadiz told the gathering that the visit was a very intensive one and that some of our local businessmen have remained in Brazil to further discussions. He noted that Trinidad and Tobago already have a number of business links with Brazil.
For instance, the Mittal company here in Trinidad is headquartered in Brazil, and there are plans, for instance, for ArcelorMittal to increase their production, which is going to be shipped back into Brazil. So there have been a number of business connections already there, that has been dealing with Trinidad. And what we did in Brazil was to meet those people, to understand what it is that they're doing, and also how they're going to increase the trade between Trinidad and Brazil. There is a disparity. Right now, Trinidad and Tobago exports something like $13 million to Brazil, with Brazil exporting to Trinidad in the vicinity of $300 million. So the idea here is to figure out ways and means to correct that imbalance. Brazil, when you look at Brazil's GDP, for instance, agriculture forms 20% of the GDP of Brazil. In Trinidad and Tobago, it is 0.5%. So there are all kinds of things that we can learn from the Brazilians. There are a number of areas that we can cooperate on. For instance, the highway going from San Fernando to Point Fortin is going to be constructed by a Brazilian company, one of the largest construction companies in Brazil. And therefore, what we're looking at is, with all this new interest, for instance, Brazil into Trinidad, we have to find ways and means of benefiting from that. And the purpose of this trip is to go to meet people, to understand how the Brazilians operate. For instance, Brazil has a very, very high percentage of what they call local input, local content. Something like 60% of every single contract in Brazil has to have local content. And that is something that we have to work around. We have to figure out ways and means of getting around that, because they're very, very strict with that. And therefore, if it is that we are supporting Brazilian, for instance, construction firms, we are supporting Brazil in other areas, we are going to have to work with the Brazilians to ensure that Trinidad and Tobago does benefit. The issue of energy, we went to, for instance, a dockyard in Rio, and it is just a massive place. How can Trinidad and Tobago compete with that? We can't compete directly with that. What we can, in fact, do, however, is we can supply components, for instance, from our local producers here in Labre to Brazil. And these are the areas that we are looking at of working with the various Brazilian companies. Because the expansion in Brazil, especially in the oil fields, is phenomenal. Whether or not Brazil can actually achieve that in the time frame that they want to is left to be seen. And what we're seeing is that Trinidad and Tobago can help the Brazilians in achieving what they want to do.
Minister of Foreign Affairs Dr. Surajratan Rambachan spoke of the emergence of Brazil as a major player in the arena of world trade. He said Trinidad and Tobago must reach out to the links Brazil is extending.
Brazil is reaching out to the Caribbean and the CARICOM region like no other country has actually reached out, especially countries out of Latin America. In fact, Brazil is one of the only countries in the world, if not the only one, who has now established embassies in every CARICOM country. And that's a tremendous sentiment and a tremendous statement of intent of Brazil, not just to treat the Caribbean as an appendage, but to treat the Caribbean as a partner. And they have done more than that. They have also, at the last meeting of heads of government, the foreign minister came there and with a delegation, a very powerful delegation, and they promised to do a number of things in the area of agriculture, as well as in areas in which they have other competencies. They have, of course, started a flight, as you know, to Barbados, a Saturday flight, and we talked to the foreign minister about extending that flight into Port of Spain, so that you may go Manaus, I believe it is, Barbados, Port of Spain, Barbados, Manaus, which would increase the possibility for people to travel much more easily to Brazil. And that is something that we need. In fact, at one time, Varig used to make that flight in the 1980s out of Brazil. So he's going to follow up on that aspect of it. In addition to that, we spoke to Embrapa. Now, Embrapa is the premier agricultural research institute in Brazil, and they are all over the world. And Brazil uses Embrapa in order to help other countries develop their agriculture. I'll give you an example. For example, in this region of Brasilia, the capital, at one time it was said that they could not grow soybeans there. And Embrapa was able to create a variety of soybeans. And today, Brasilia is one of the highest yielding areas for soybean per hectare in Brazil. So it shows the capacity of that organization to contribute to agricultural development. Now, we in Trinidad and Tobago must increase our food production. I believe that food is going to be the next weapon that countries are going to use, if you may use a terminology. Already India and Pakistan and so on, they are saying that they are not going to be exporting certain commodities, so that we have to look for other sources of food. A couple of members of the delegation went specifically to look at Brazil in terms of the export of food, particularly meats, to Trinidad and Tobago. Now, you know that we have this problem from the 80s and 70s about foot and mouth disease. But the EU imports beef out of Brazil, and other countries are importing, which means that they have dealt with the problem. So we have to step up and deal with the problem also and bring meat cheaper to our people. We import from Australia and New Zealand now, which is costing us a hell of a lot. So that is something also that part of the delegation went to Sao Paulo to deal with. But there are other kinds of food that we use here that can also be imported at cheaper prices from Brazil. So that's another area of cooperation that we looked at.
It was perhaps one of the most hectic missions by Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar and her 52-member delegation. Gideon Hanuman Singh followed the mission and provided this report.
First, it was Brasilia, arriving on the historic Caribbean Airlines charter, direct from Port of Spain, significantly reducing travel time and cutting enormous costs, ensuring that the revenue spent remains with the national carrier. She chose a plaque unveiling ceremony to make the point, indicating that air transportation will play a critical role in the renewed trade and investment initiatives between Brazil and Trinidad and Tobago.
We do not have the transport links that remain further apart than we should be. And that would be an area that we would want to discuss here. Because if it could take us 4 hours on a direct flight, we can open up the rest of the world to you.
Quite naturally, construction of the Chancery and residences on lands gifted 38 years ago by the government and people of Brazil will signify the intent of her government to further cement the friendly relations which began in 1965, placing Port of Spain and Brasilia in a particular paradigm. Strong endorsement from Minister Rubens Gama, Director, Central America and Caribbean Division of the Ministry of External Relations.
Prime Minister, the strengthening of our relations with the Caribbean has been one of the cornerstones of the Brazilian foreign policy in the last years. We have done a lot in the last years, actually, and I'm sure there's much more to be done in the future.
Then she was off to talks with Embrapa officials on ways the world-famous research center could assist Trinidad and Tobago in agri-science and food production. Then it was off to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where discussion centered around Trinidad and Tobago and Brazil foreign policy with specific reference to its new mantra of trade diplomacy. In the evening, she attended a reception hosted by Ambassador Hamza Rafiq, where the staff presented her a birthday cake. But the moment brought tears to Nandini Rambachan, wife of the Foreign Minister Suraj Rambachan, as they both were reunited with the staff who worked at the home when Dr. Rambachan was ambassador.
I think I was crying so much because I couldn't speak. She's like my sister, and ambassador is like my brother. I remember they are the best. It's not a demagogy, but he was the best boss. I had 4 or 5 ambassadors before, but that we will work, and this ambassador is part of my family. Most of the time I remember them.
Side by side with all the economics and technology and so on are the people-to-people relationships, and we have to build that. And that is often built by a greater understanding of music and culture and dance and food and what have you. So while we do all the hard stuff, we must also get onto the soft stuff. Because I believe where people integrate, you find countries get together for matters of trade on a much more fruitful basis.
The following day, it was off to the 6th World Economic Conference, and her first order of business was a roundtable on education, examining challenges in Latin America, amazingly a region with a high dropout rate within the school system.
That half of the 15-year-olds in these 6 countries believe that organized crime either improves the financial well-being of the citizens, helps them feel safer, or strengthen the reliability of the government.
One way to combat the problem, said the Prime Minister, is to create a system of national mentoring, and suggested the adoption of the Trinidad and Tobago model. She also advocated the widespread use of laptops in schools, calling on computer manufacturers to offer concessionary prices to school systems within the region, citing the index benefits to Trinidad and Tobago of such a program.
This year's report, which documents the past year, has put Trinidad and Tobago, lifted our ranking. They've moved us 16 points in 1 year, which is a tremendous. It's never happened before that one country has moved 16 points on the technology index because of our laptop initiative.
The Prime Minister is linking all of this to the strong belief that education is not just a basic need or right, but a critical chain that links societal development.
We have put a great emphasis on education. Education is the passport. It is the key out of poverty. It is the key out of anarchy and chaos. It is the key out of criminal activity. And so for us, it is a high priority for our government at this present time.
On the margins of the conference, she held bilateral talks with various interest groups, including officials of the United Nations Development Programme and Brazil's Foreign Minister, Antonio Patriota, who remembered eating shark and bake at Maracas Bay. Later Thursday morning, the Prime Minister attended a UN-sponsored meeting on closing the gender gaps for a more equitable world, a subject which is taking her on the global stage.
Once upon a time, we talked about women's liberation. And women then who were fighting for what was termed women's liberation were seen as strange people, weird people, different people. After the women's lib movement came other kinds of areas, from the Hillary Clinton initiative talking about women's rights as women's rights as human rights. But I think in this fourth age of mankind, the age of knowledge, we now have a scenario to see the empowerment of women as being essential to sustainable development. And therefore, for us as women leaders, it is imperative that we dedicate resources to the upliftment and empowerment of women. And why do we do it? In the very simplest sense, it would be that women as mothers will have the greatest influence on their children. And if we are to grow our children and educate them and take them forward, the first basic things, it is shown, research obviously, and just from common sense, that if you have a woman with any level of education, then her child will be healthier, because basics of healthcare would be known. If you have a woman of any level of education, she will also seek to empower her children through education. And when that happens, I'm saying, if women hold up half the sky, then together with the men, we can hold up the whole sky for our nations.
In her continuing drive to market Trinidad and Tobago, she met with various business interests in Rio, sharing the moment with members of the business delegation on the trip.
There is a boom in the construction industry with the World Cup coming up in 2014, and then the Olympics also coming in 2016. And the amount of infrastructure that has to be put in is significant.
We are the only institute that is presently has the international vocational qualification with City and Guilds.
I think there's a definite place for us. I think we can, a lot of our expertise between the 9 companies that came to Brazil, you know, they could form joint ventures with Brazilian companies, and I think there are clear opportunities here.
Because of the size of the market and the size of the industry overall, I see it as a medium-term, long-term area for us to be in. So I'm very, very excited about what I've seen and heard this morning.
To see the BG Brazil people getting so excited about them, to want to be able to use them, it was fantastic. So it is an endorsement. It is really an endorsement for some of our better companies and the possibilities for some of the others that didn't make the trip to see that there's an opportunity here in Brazil for going forward.
In fact, Fiona Phelps's vision is already a mission upon which the Prime Minister has embarked, espousing once again the value of undertaking person-to-person contacts in the mega business environment.
Although Trinidad is only a 1.3 million population, we're such a small island, we have done world-class work. But the world now needs to know about it, and we just can't keep that world-class work home and a secret to ourselves.
Friday afternoon, and she meets with Ronald Baudelaire of Petrobras, a giant in the world energy environment who has been knocking on the Trinidad and Tobago door for the past 4 years.
Mr. Prime Minister, how are you?
Among the prime ministerial agenda and busy business schedule, she met former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, who conveyed greetings from his wife Sherry. Speaking afterwards, Mr. Blair answered a question about coalition politics in London and the lessons Britain can learn from a tiny Caribbean island like Trinidad and Tobago.
Whenever people talk about coalition governments, we put that as against one single party. But having been a Prime Minister 3 terms with a single party, there's also coalitions within parties. So funnily enough, you find that coalitions bring their challenges, but usually you find those challenges also appear even if it's a single party that's in power. So, around the world now, coalition governments, even in the UK, are things that are quite common.
these missions that we are engaged in are very beneficial to Trinidad and Tobago. We cannot stay at home and expect that people will come to look for us. We have to go out there. We have to find investment because that is the way to survive. Yes, you say we can stand on our own. The world now is a global village. But we cannot remain a village. We have to go out there globally, seek the investment, seek those who want to partner with us. And thus far, on the various missions we've been on, many people are very excited. I mean, Mr. Blair actually came here to meet us after his address when he learned we were here as well. He called and indicated, can I meet you at whatever time we can meet? Others have met us, many others. I was very interested, though, in this particular mission with the Petrobras, with their initiative and their great interest in being in Trinidad and Tobago. You would think they are like the 5th largest company in the world, and yet they're very interested in Trinidad and Tobago. So something good is happening in TT, and I will go there and market Trinidad and Tobago as the best I can.
We had a very, very successful and meaningful meeting with the Minister of Foreign Affairs himself, in which several matters of great concern to Trinidad and Tobago was discussed, and he promised to look into them very, very quickly. In fact, asked us to forward diplomatic notes so that we could proceed with some of these matters, including the relationship with Embrapa. And he was very enthused about, the air transport between Port of Spain and Brazil. And in his own words, let us make it happen.
But the people that we have met here, the companies that we have met, and the possibilities, the opportunities, of course, in Brazil are enormous. And even though Brazil has been known to have a fairly closed economy and policy closure, there's real interest in partnering with a country like Trinidad and Tobago, especially in the oil and gas business. So we had a whole mix of between oil and gas and agriculture, sugar, manufacturing, and really and truly the discussions have been extremely good. And we really and truly look forward to the opportunities that have been created here on this trip.
I had a meeting with the representatives from Pegasus, which is a company that imports asphalt into Brazil. They have done their studies, they have done their experiments, they have paved some roads, and they have monitored it and evaluated it. And this month, in May, 3 containers of asphalt are coming to Brazil, and this year they are projecting to have 250 containers come, and next year with another 70% increase. So that is another project, and of course several agricultural initiatives are on the way as well.
Rio the River, born in January, courting in April, Prime Minister Kamala Persad-Bissessar and her delegation, opening up new possibilities for economic cooperation between 2 hemispheric neighbors with lots in common, multi-ethnic, cross-cultural, and 2 of the world's best carnivals. But 2 outstanding features that would skyrocket in favor of Brazil are its cable cars on Sugarloaf Mountain that is nothing less than awesome. Standing here at the top of Sugarloaf Mountain, I get the impression that I'm literally walking on the clouds. And of course, the huge statue of Christ the Redeemer, which looms over the city of Rio, one of the new 7 wonders of the world. A paradise for the curious, a haven for the photographer, a pilgrimage for the believer, but generally an amazing 1931 construction that appeals to everyone. The perfect sunset to a most successful first mission for Prime Minister Kamala Persad-Bissessar. This is Gideon Hanamansing reporting from Rio de Janeiro.
And that's it for Pillars of Progress for this evening. Join us again tomorrow night as we continue to look at our government at work.